Welcome back to Council Island. I say welcome back, but this is the very first episode, although it does have a little reminiscence of some podcasting we did a couple years ago when we first talked about the rezoning for housing. But this is your go-to source for the goings-on down at Calgary City Hall. I'm Alex Williams, your host, and today I'm joined by Biz and Christian. Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
What's up, everybody?
Excellent. Perfect. Today's show is a bit of an early launch for the show, for this podcast, providing some context. To provide some context, yesterday was a big city council meeting where Calgary City Council talking about reversing the rezoning the previous council did in 2024. If you've not yet watched the meeting, spoiler alert, they did vote yes on this big item, deciding that they are going to further investigate this conversation and ultimately reverse this rezoning. And of course, because we're going to talk housing, change, and parking, everybody's favorite topic, I've got some friends here. So let's get into it. First impressions from you guys from this council meeting. This is kind of our first, beyond the budget, this is our first look at what this new city council is going to be and what we can expect. How are we feeling? Biz, I'll let you go first.
This was bad. This was I've been saying it in a couple different places. I think this might have been the worst day for council since they rejected the housing strategy back in 2023. And if you don't remember that, essentially there was this document that came forward from some professionals saying, here's all the things the city needs to do in order to, fix our housing situation for mostly affordability in the city of Calgary, but also has obviously knock-on effects to livability and sustainability. And the councillors said, nope, we don't want that. See you later. And that's kind of what launched all of this action around More Neighbours Calgary. And eventually the rezoning happened as a result of them finally taking the housing strategy back. And so, yeah, the decisions yesterday, I would say that there's kind of three big decisions that have to do with housing. And it's not just any one of them that I think makes this one of the worst days in council history, but it's the fact that we got all three of them at the same time.
The trifecta, right? Yeah, the holy bringing
we'll get into
of...
it.
Yeah, it is very disappointing. And I was having the conversation with my dad tonight. He called me as he was driving and he says, I don't understand. Everybody I know has housing. So is there really a housing crisis? And I'm thinking, well, we're very fortunate that, in our family, we have the support and we have our needs met, but a lot of people don't have access to that. And so even though in your immediate circle, things might seem okay, or you might have other frustrations, that doesn't mean that everyone is experiencing the city in exactly that same way. So, Christian, let's go to you. Tell me your thoughts on this meeting.
Yeah, I think, taking a little bit of a different perspective, the way that Farkas runs or chairs city council, I think is an improvement. I think the way each city councilor communicates outside of council chambers is a huge improvement for some councillors and especially the mayor. And so, the way people understand what happens at City Hall has always traditionally been filtered through press, like articles. And, the people who are reading that are 600 years old, right? The more that each councillor communicates, I think the more normal Calgarians start to understand what's happening. And I think most Calgarians, the system isn't working for currently. So I'm hoping that with this new city council and this new way of running things and this new way of communicating, the feedback gets to where it needs to go directly to the people who are making those decisions. Previously, only on, mostly homeowners voting, right? We're expanding the people interested in municipal politics because the system isn't working for a lot of people. Or at least that's my hope. And that's my general vibes-based analysis on the new city council. Yeah.
And on those vibes, I mean, when I'm not podcasting and editing podcasts like I do for work, I am chairing Calgary Transit Riders. and I get to interact with our city councilors. And I've already had a lot of conversations with our city councilors and with Mayor Farkas. And I think a lot of them, they care about the city. That's why they applied for this job. That's why they ran for city council. And so I really do. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, and I want to be optimistic about this city council. And we're here talking mostly about housing today on this podcast. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity for some great success with this council for transit. And I hope that we can work with this city council in good faith to get some wins for housing as well. This meeting did not determine the fate of housing in Calgary. It is not, it's not done. It's not over. And like I said, I want to extend the benefit of the doubt to a lot of these people. So maybe starting off on a positive note, Christian, do you have anybody during this meeting that you felt particularly impressed by? Not necessarily by the amendments that they brought forward, but maybe by their debates, or maybe by just the way that they dealt with people. You already mentioned Mayor Farkas as somebody you seemed at least somewhat surprised by.
Maybe I have the stars in my eyes for Mayor Farkas and I need to get them out of there. But, he spent like 3 minutes at least, maybe it was a little bit more, going through sort of the thought process on allowing Councillor Wyness's motion on the main, why he would allow that in his eyes to be debated. And I'm just like, I watched a decent amount of city council. I'm certainly not an expert, but I never saw that type of just granular detail by detail explanation. And so when you see people voting against it, it's like, okay, you've been called out. Like, if your reasons are, sorry, Mayor, just didn't feel like it, which was basically what a lot of other city councilors says. It's like, okay, well, now I know what type of, honestly, person you are. You've kind of shown your kind of true colors and what you believe, because there's not like a robust argument in defense of your voting style. It's just, I don't like that and I don't want to talk about it. And so me vote no.
I kind of, I actually appreciated the same way you appreciated Mayor Farkas going into detail on his thought process. I also appreciated the debate and the perspective that came from the other councillors on their reasoning for thinking that that Councillor Wyness's amendment was out of order. I appreciated that conversation. Like you mentioned before, having this opportunity to educate people a little bit and to have that dialogue about how does city council work? How do these bylaws operate? How do we get things done? And that's one of the hopes with Council Island, with this, kind of cheekily named podcast, is that we will be able to bring more people into the interest of municipal affairs, especially because, we have such low voter turnout. Here in Ward 11, where I live and where I ran in the last election, we had the highest voter turnout in the city. And it was just shy of 50% voter turnout. And wow. That's eligible voters. That's not population, right? So 800,000 people in the whole city eligible to vote. And, less than half of that. I think it was, 36% was the
39, I think
39%
was the final total, yeah.
was the total.
Which is so disappointing, because when I knocked on all these doors, or not all these doors, I had lots of conversations with people who couldn't vote and were like, oh yeah, I'm following a little bit, like, and I think they're interested probably because their housing situation, like that, from the conversations I had, at least that was the number one concern. It's like, oh, but I can't vote, but thank you for taking the time to speak to me. And I'm like, all these other people who are registered voters just not giving a shit is really kind of disappointing, for sure.
Yeah. And so I do hope that we can get more people kind of active and engaged and interested in what's going on. One thing that I got from the campaign was that you can basically say anything after "I heard on the doors that," because you hear everything on the doors. Every single time you hear a politician say, well, I've heard my constituents tell me. Your constituents are going to tell you a lot of things. I had somebody tell me that they were going to vote for whoever supports a nuclear armament program. on the municipal
for the city of Calgary.
Well,
Wow.
they were talking for the nation.
We need to get serious.
That was their municipal
Where are the armaments?
voting issue, right? Like
They might have weapons. They might have WMDs under the legislature.
The
up in
water treatment
Edmonton.
plant.
Yeah.
The legislature.
Right. I made jokes about, oh well, we can have the silos at Anderson Station, you know,
man.
like, and so you can hear anything.
Nuclear.
You can hear anything on the doors.
Yeah.
So I do want to, encourage people to, be one of those voices, be one of the people who talks to your counselor, and they can go on to council and say, well, I've been hearing from my constituents that X, Y, Z. Biz, what about you? Was there anybody who impressed you during this meeting?
I have like my problems with everybody. I feel very cynical about what happened yesterday, but I'll try to put on a nice smile for the
No,
cameras.
I mean, give us the cynicism too.
I think, yeah, Christian, for sure, talking about Farkas, he's really impressed me with just how he'll stop the debate or just kind of stop the meeting from proceeding, just to be like, by the way, I'm really impressed with like the thought that you put into this motion and the way that you crafted it and that you did your due diligence and talked with administration. Like, he's really encouraging good behavior out of counselors, which I find really helpful and a good marker of his character and the way that he's changed over the last few years.
Yeah, and also notably important with a very fresh-faced council.
Exactly. And just making those expectations clear, again, with, being really detailed about why he's making certain decisions and referencing procedure by law and just kind of trying to cite where he's getting his information from. It's really helpful for all the rookies. One rookie that I want to give a shout out to, I mean, he's not really a rookie. I like to say DJ Kelly probably had more notice of motions passed in the last council than Sean Chu. But for someone who's technically a first-term councillor, even though he's done tons of work at the city behind the scenes, he's just got such like a full chest. He's so confident. He brought forward quite a few amendments and motions arising that were pretty strong and had good fulsome debate on them, even if he didn't get a whole lot of success with them. And so that was definitely really impressive to see someone who was trying really hard to make fulsome compromises and being able to juggle that role of being pro-housing and understanding the role that flexible zoning policy plays and why it's so necessary to provide sustainability, livability, affordability, but also his experience with his constituents and knowing, he said, like, where I live on a laneless parcel, like, 4plexes and 8plexes will simply just not make sense. And so there is some of that where he like recognizes the political need to compromise, but knows when it's irresponsible to go too far.
Yeah, and I also think it's important to remember throughout this conversation that what RCG does, it doesn't say you can just do this anywhere. There are still so many lot requirements based on the scale, the size, the location of said lot. It's not like you can pull up a little lot in New Brighton and just knock it down and build 12 row homes on it, right? There are a lot of other things that go into that. I remember during the first RCG hearing in 2024, David White brought that up about how few lots there are in the city that would actually permit us having like a full scale, 4x4 kind of RCG build there.
It's about 5%.
Yeah, like it's not a lot, and I think maybe there's some opportunity with this council, with this process, to maybe clarify those rules a little bit, or maybe communicate them better. That's something that I've taken issue throughout this whole thing.
It's really annoying because the bylaw can either be simple or it can be like, you can either have it be simple and kind of easy to understand in that way, where there's not a whole lot, and so it's accessible and you can read the whole thing and it doesn't feel insane, or you can bloat it really, really hard so that there's no room for interpretation. And so I think that Edmund has had a really difficult time striking this balance, where I remember in the rezoning debate, people were complaining about 12plexes, that were not physically possible to actually put on a lot. But if you read the bylaw that said that you can have 4 units and each of those units can have a basement suite and a backyard suite, and you do the math, 4 plus 4 plus 4, oh no, you can build 12 units. And even if you would actually like build the 3D model of what that would look like on your average lot, and you find out that that's only possible if each like backyard suite is like 100 square feet, that still kind of is able to do the rounds, because people are kind of saying, 12 feet, and then they're spreading that around faster than they're actually like checking and making sure if it's possible. And so it's like always really difficult with land use bylaws, like, and like, it's all up to individual site constraints too. And you literally cannot write those into a bylaw without making it just the most ridiculous piece of text ever concocted.
Can I?
Yeah.
I just want to say, I think RCG is like a boogeyman term that community associations whisper before they put their kids to bed at night to scare. Like, it's become in people's imaginations, or in people's understandings, not their imaginations, sorry. So I think people's core issue, their core concern is development, full stop. If they're concerned about RCG, they might see like HGO go up in their community. That's RCG. Any 12-story building, oh hell, it's RCG again. Here comes the blanket rezoning, right? And so any clarity that we can bring to these terms is welcome. But I mean, to be fair, the city didn't they? I mean, I got a package in the mail. Were these not blanketed parcels telling exactly what the rezoning is about? And I mean, it's online. I mean, how much more can be done, really? I don't know.
Yeah, and I do think, the communications aspect of it is one of the biggest struggles that that the city has had. There was even in this process. So, I mean, the notice of motion that was brought forward, the title was repealing blanket rezoning or whatever it was, but it included blanket rezoning, which is not wording that the city used. This was part of the issue, and I saw this on a post online. Somebody was saying blanket rezoning. They were talking about that, and it was an urbanist bringing it up and saying this is the issue when you let engineers and planners come up with the terms that we're using. And I didn't get into it with this person, but I was like, well, the city wasn't using blanket rezoning. They were saying rezoning for housing. Yeah. That was the reason we are rezoning is for housing. And that was the city's comms line. However, it got completely trampled. It got completely taken over by other people who were calling it blanket rezoning. We're calling it blanket rezoning. One other thing, and then city administration then, because Chabot was using this language and everybody on council was using this language in their campaign, even if they were campaigning in favor of it or campaigning, like Mike Atkinson said, to fix it, they were still using this blanket rezoning phrase instead of rezoning for housing. And so we kind of lost the plot a little bit about what the point of all of this is. And so we got obsessed with this blanket language, just like Councillor Dhaliwal mentioned, that, rezoning around primary transit network, that's just a little blanket. It's just a tiny blanket.
That drove me so nuts. And we can get into it. So the whole debate.
At what point does a grain of sand become a pile of sand, right? Like how many grains of sand equals a pile of sand? That, at what point does a blanket, is it just like a little swatch, right?
Yeah. So we might have a clip of this available, because I think this was just one of the most ridiculous moments. It was Dhaliwal and Councillor Ward in their debate against DJ Kelly's amendment. And so DJ Kelly brought forward this amendment where instead of... Okay, let's start from the beginning. So the main motion that was brought forward, I think it was Councillor Chabot was putting... Well, actually, it was 7 councillors had signed on to it. Well, 6 councillors and the mayor. But I think Chabot was the mover. Mm-hmm. And it says, we are going to repeal blanket rezoning. But there's a whole discussion about you can't actually fully repeal. There's no such thing as just reverting to a previous decision, because there's all these decisions that were made afterwards. And if you were to repeal all of those in one fell swoop, there would be just ridiculous legal repercussions for that. And so what Chabot is doing is we're going to add back the RC1, RC2, R1, and R2 land use districts back into the zoning bylaw and whatever other stuff. I don't even remember. There was like 8 different districts or something, and like most of them were ridiculous. So we're going to add those back. And then if your parcel was one of those before the decision was made on like May 16th or whatever, and then it went into effect on August 6th of last year, then that's going to be reverted unless unless a development has already happened there, or there's a DP that's like in the approvals process already. And so that's their way of avoiding liability. Which actually, that might even be cool if this goes forward once we get to a public hearing. So again, they voted yes on starting the repeal process, but it has to go to a public hearing either in March or in May. Okay, so back up. It might be cool to see where those actually happened, even though we can see the DPs and stuff. So essentially, there's a few little things that we have to hold on to. It sounds like Chabot wants to do this through the LAP process, and so maybe he'll bring forward an amendment to respect some of the language in the LAP if it kind of shows here's where the RCG and the HCO should go. Maybe we'll get some more mini blanket rezoning. But the argument is that we should do a targeted approach that has more community buy-in, and that maybe even will result in more certainty for developers and more housing units developed. I think it's a little dubious, but the argument from Chabot is that we should get rid of this blanket, which has eroded public trust. I don't know if the zoning has eroded public trust or if it's the discursive formation and the media that have pushed this narrative really hard that's eroded public trust. So that would be my pushback on that. But that we should go for a targeted approach instead.
Yeah, I'll note that like most people do not care. Like I knocked 18,000 doors.
We should say infill, and we have data on this. Infill was a top 3 issue for 8% of Calgarian voters.
Yeah. Like most people do not care.
Yeah.
But the people who show up do. And that's the difference, right? Yeah. The people who show up to public hearings care. The people who show up to the ballot box care. That's the difference. Most people do not care. Like it does not matter to them. But City Council doesn't make decisions based on what everybody wants. They make decisions based on what the people who speak up, the people who vote, the people who show up, based on what they want. And I think that's a really important thing to remember when we're having these conversations. You mentioned the LAPs and the rezoning there. I like part of the struggle with that. There are always going to be people unhappy, disappointed with this stuff. There was a project in the Beltline approved at today's council meeting, unanimously approved, that had 86 people write in against it, right? And so there are always going to be people who are unhappy, people who are disappointed, people who don't want whatever to be happening. And so I'm going to be very, very curious and watching attentively as City Council kind of navigates this, because even the people who said they are going to repeal, they are going to end up pissing a lot of people off, people who voted for them and people who supported them specifically because they said that they were going to repeal. But the problem is they're going to repeal, and then they're going to, on an ongoing basis, even if it's completely back to the way that it was almost 2 years ago, even if it's completely back to that, they are still going to be approving things that frustrate people. That frustrate, and
they're probably going to have to deal with significantly more frustration once this is in people's head. They know what a redevelopment is in some way. And so I think, and we'll get into more analysis of the different things that went on. I didn't forget about DJ Kelly's amendment. We'll get back there. But I think that this is a good leverage point for our side of the debate, is that we really need to crack open the distinction between a land use redesignation public hearing and that whole process of doing that, and redevelopment. Okay, you can not like redevelopment, sure, that's fine. Just like whatever, if you're like a full like banana, like don't do anything ever anywhere. But, and this is unfortunate, is that the idea of the land use public hearing has gotten sort of entangled with the idea of development. So people will say, oh man, this, like you said, this 6-story thing is getting developed. This must be blanket rezoning's fault. Or there's this article in the Herald about, oh man, this blanket rezoning experiment has had, direct impact on me as a Bowness resident. There was this project with 34 units and 17 suites that was next to me on 4 lots. So I actually looked into it. I'm not exactly 100% sure that this is the project being talked about, but the only project I could fit with those criteria in Bowness was an MCG, not an RCG, an MCG development that was approved in a case-by-case one public hearing in 2020. And so people will see their frustrations with a townhome or a development, and they will associate that with blanket rezoning because that's kind of all they know. But it's really not responsible for that. All blanket rezoning does is that it takes away the land use public hearing from the process. And so there's no guarantee that if we brought that back, it would
very specifically units that are being developed under like the RCG bylaw.
It's so specific. It's so ridiculous.
Like, it's extremely specific.
It's crazy that we're having this discussion and we're getting into it. Honestly,
it's just townhomes. 5% of them can be an 8-plex, and that's.
But I think this is the issue: is that some councillors, with the encouragement of media and like community associations, and people who have a say and a voice, and people who other people look up to, they've trained a lot of people in Calgary to be anti-development. And at the end of the day, the city council is not anti-development as an organization because they can't, the city wouldn't grow. It would be a non-starter. So it's kind of, you've trained a base to think a certain way, and now what? Right?
And there's a kind of misanthropic attitude at City Hall right now that I think we can also try to flip. And this is one of the biggest distinctions is Councillor Wyness, who voted for rezoning for housing when it came up. And she even, we kind of talked about it earlier, she put forward an amendment so that it would be an opt-out process instead of a full reversion. So that instead of it being, okay, everybody gets R1 again, instead of it being that, it's going to be, if you want R1, then you can do that. Which I think would be incredible. If we can bring that back, which we still could, we could bring that back for the public hearing. I think for me, that's the ideal approach. If you're that like hell-bent on not having RCG in your neighborhood, then like go petition your neighbors and you can set it to R1 and have that peace of mind if that's really, really what you want. But we need this flexibility for the rest of the city so that we can just kind of function. But what ended up happening later on is that there was this, I think it was a motion arising, came up after they made the decision that, yes, we are going to start the process of going through with the full repeal, that went in and said, while this repeal discussion is happening at the public hearing later on, we're going to also vote on these set of criteria that will change the RCG zone to be less effective and less viable, by reducing the height by 1 meter, reducing the lot coverage by 5%. And then Mike Atkinson, supposed to be a pro-housing progressive. We can get into it. I got no problem with Mike. I'm sorry, Mike, but this is bad strategy on my part. I wrote him a letter, and I don't know, we can hash it out. We'll talk about it. But he also reduced the maximum number of units from 4 to 3. And the way Jennifer Wyness said, and this isn't like you get one or the other. To me, these are mutually exclusive. Either if we think that RCG does need to come down in density in order to be applicable everywhere across the city, sure, let's do that. But if we're going to only make it allowed in case-by-case bases and that it needs like this council approval, like we're treating it like it's nuclear waste, then why would we make it bad? Why would we make it suck and like more difficult to deliver housing? But no, Jennifer Wyness was clear. The reason that she's doing this is so that once we go back to RC1, I don't want those RCG rules to be bad for communities or whatever it was. It was something like that. That was like almost verbatim. And so I think it's really, really interesting to describe having more homes for people as bad for communities. And so this is just like, we need to start talking about the benefits of having more people in your communities, the ways that this can liven up a neighborhood and create more opportunities for vibrance and success. And so it's very disappointing to hear that conversation from people that were on the progressive side of this issue.
Alex and Biz, should we just be raising money to send all 15 councillors to like a suburb of Paris? Like, is that the more effective way of doing this? And like have some like a tour guide be like, oh, this is the build form, and like take them through.
This would be very illegal everywhere in your city.
Yeah, and they can ask like country people in this Parisian suburb of, you know, fairly dense housing, like, how's your quality of life?
It's like, so what's the process for approvals on like opening a cafe here? And they're like, what?
Well, no, I think that's part of the thing. Like, I mean, all of these things that come up, we're talking about communities, we're talking about people, and I want to note, like, not liking something is a valid criticism.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I don't like the color that my neighbor painted their house. That's totally okay. You are allowed to not like that. I don't like that my neighbor chopped down their tree. That is 100% valid. Yeah. I didn't like it when my neighbor chopped down their tree either, right? Like these are valid and allowed criticisms. But we are talking about people needing roofs over their heads. And so I think it's really important to not lose sight of that as a city, and hopefully as city council that they don't lose sight of that either. I also think that what we're talking about so often in this context is new people moving into the community, when it really is like communities should be adaptable. And this is very strong townsy. Like, communities should be adaptable to the needs of the people who already live there. I live in an aging neighborhood, and a lot of people are finding it harder and harder to stay in their homes. And so how do we make it easier for people to stay in their community, to stay in the area where they've built those relationships? How do we make it easier for when the young people who've grown up here and then they go off to university, how do we make it easier for them to come back to their community and give back and you know, take part in that community that they've been a part of? What we've forgotten is that the neighborhood, the community, is the people, but we talk about it like it's the built form, like it's the housing, like it's the design and the architecture. That is not the community. That is not the neighborhood. It is the people. And in all of these conversations, we completely forget about that. In this desire to keep our community from changing, we in fact force it to change, right? Because this community is designed to suit this type of person. And I don't know if you've noticed this in yourself or not, but you are not the same person you were a decade ago. You are certainly not the same person you were 2 decades ago. And so I think it's really important and really key that we try and, you know, as we go into this conversation, we keep that central to it, is that the community, the neighborhood, is the people in it, not the architecture. As much as it, you know, might truly be an important part of, you know, the feeling that we have in our community, and the personal taste that you have.
I think it's an important thing that we have to bring to the discussion, is this idea of we can redesign things, and that it's not about either or. It's not about a with us or against us kind of deal. And this is what we tried to stress when the discussion for rezoning first came around last year, is that if you've got problems with trash, that's your main issue with this, and you would be okay with it otherwise, awesome. Let's figure out how we can encourage these developers to use Malaks, because we know that they're better anyway. You know, your problem is cars clogging up the parking. Okay, what do we need to do in order to control that parking and have more people use the garages that they have, that we know that they're not using, or else there wouldn't be a problem. Things like that. And for infrastructure, it drives me absolutely bonkers. And people say, you know, the neighborhood wasn't designed for this.
I get that all the time in my
downtown
in my
Calgary was designed for single family homes at a time, right? And you can see that back in like the 1920s, it was just mostly people's single family homes that were on the block in downtown Calgary. And through time, it redeveloped, and we were able to widen things and move things around when it needed to, in order to update that assemblage of factors that are using the space there, and we could do the same thing in any neighborhood we want to. And especially with the infrastructure conversation, there was actually an infrastructure readiness report that came forward at the top of the day, where council got to learn that there were only 3 RCG developments in the last year that triggered an infrastructure upgrade out of the, I think, about 1,000. And then what's also really important to recognize is people are saying, oh, well, what if? There's a lot of what ifs and there's a lot of fear. And I like when Teresa Goldstein came up, I think she's the director of planning, and just said, if we run the development through our model and it shows that there's going to be an infrastructure problem, we cannot approve the DP. We cannot do that. Like, we do this work. We see if the infrastructure is prepared for it. We're legally not allowed not to.
From the layman's terms, though, at least this is in my community, people are up in arms about any development. I live in the small community of Earlton. It's just south of M&P Center. And people all the time will say, we don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the infrastructure for the blanket rezoning. First of all, there's no RCG in Earlton. But what people mean when they hear or when they say infrastructure, I think really at the core of what they're meaning is parking. The roads are not big enough for the people. Like, if you really question and dig down,
it's not big enough for their cars.
Is it about the parks? yeah. Is it about the parks? Is it about the water pressure in the pipe? Like, what are you worried about? Honestly, the intersection at rush hour, that's tricky, and it's going to get more tricky. Like, so when Teresa Goldstein goes up and she says this doesn't trigger an infrastructure review, I feel like people back home are saying bullshit. There's infrastructure to me is traffic infrastructure, essentially. And I guess that part wasn't really expanded upon, and I think that's the chief complaint of most of the people when it comes to redevelopment.
That's fair. I think, and the fact that a lot of these communities where RCG is clustered around, so there was also a heat map in that report that showed where it was. It's usually wards 1, 7, 8, 9, actually not even very much 8, and like only kind of the suburban parts of 7, and 4.
11 was a pretty big one too.
And then just like none essentially in any of the like more suburban wards where car dependence is absolutely required. And so a lot of the places where RCG is hitting is the places that have seen a lot of population decline, sometimes for decades. And so they need that reinvestment to come so that we can actually start to upgrade the infrastructure as it's getting older. But it asks us the question, why are we seeing traffic problems and parking problems if there's fewer people living here than did like several decades ago? Why is it so that people are using their cars more and that they're taking up more space than they were a long time ago?
Well, and part of it is that there are more 2-car households and household size is smaller. And so now instead of 2 parents and 2 kids in a household, you have 2 parents, maybe no kids in a household, and instead of having 1 car for the whole family, you have 2 cars for the whole family. That's not how every family operates, but on average, that's been the trajectory since the 40s and 50s, when a lot of those communities experiencing a lot of this change happened. So you have lower population density with an increasing unit density and an increase car density. And so it's a challenge, right? Because cars are geometrically horrible for cities. They do not work in dense areas. And I think Councillor Atkinson brought it up really well, during that meeting, talking about the need to have, how do we move people around, and we need to change our language. How do we move people around? Not how do we move cars around? How do we move people around?
And do we have triggers in that infrastructure readiness process where we say, do we have the bus service that's required to get these people moving around without a vehicle?
Yeah, because you can't widen every road some more, right? You can't. And notably, increased development on the edges of the city also leads to increased pressure on existing infrastructure in the city, right? It's not like, oh, don't worry, the pipes in Seaton are going to deal with all of seat and waste and water and everything else. No, those pipes also end up, transferring their waste and their water and everything else around the city, whatever that network underground looks like. And same thing with cars, right? If you build a neighborhood on the edge of the city, but they still have to hop on Deerfoot and head downtown for work, well, they're still using that infrastructure. It doesn't matter if they live in Acadia or in Seton. They're still using that segment of Deerfoot.
Yeah, if the folks in Earlton are frustrated about the traffic that's trying to move through like 25th and McLeod, then surely they must be very, very frustrated every time we build another suburb on 218th Avenue and 250th Avenue South and whatever.
This is the core of the argument that I or discussion piece that in person I try to tell, my neighbors, people I like and people who are invested in the community, they're honestly good people. They'll volunteer their time to clean up trash. They will repaint fences. They will help people out when they are sick or we had a flood. Some people took some other people in. Like there's that real sense of community. And I think the core argument is we had this mood board of what do you like about Earlton? And it was walkability, closeness to downtown, community feel. And it's like, okay, now what about development threatens these three things, right? And I think I would say none of them. I think we just need to change our perspectives a little bit about what that redevelopment means, because your core values aren't in conflict with more people living here. Just your perception of what more people living here will do to you at that intersection at 4:30. That is the challenge. So, increasing investment in transit and, making the pass better and everything like that has to be a part of the discussion, or people get lost in the sauce, I think, about, the infrastructure. I'm saying that in quotations, and by infrastructure, they just mean like F-150s on McLeod. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's a pretty healthy, positive, and optimistic note to end things on, is that like these are people in our neighborhood, the people who we disagree with, right? I had a lot of conversations with them on the doorstep and at events, and for a lot of them, like this is the only thing that we disagreed on was the rezoning, and so I think it's important that as we continue this discussion, this very long, extended, drawn-out discussion that we've had as a city, that we remember that everybody who's showing up to these public hearings, everyone who's writing into their councillor, whether you agree with them or not, we're all people who care about our city. Biz, I'll give you one last word, Christian, one last word, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I was going to say I need to end this on a negative note now.
Yeah, do it. Yeah.
To give people a reason to write into council. So the last big decision that was made yesterday, and this I think is the worst, we are now down the pathway of repealing RCG, number one. Number two, RCG is going to be worse afterwards is the likeliest scenario. This could all change by the time we get to the public hearing. With your support, if you get and you tell your counselors how you feel about this and you come to the public hearing, and we'll be talking about this for months. And then number three is there's supposed to be the replacement strategy that comes forward, right? And they tried to put little bits of it. Okay, well, we need a targeted approach. Fine, let's do it around transit. Oh no, we can't do it around transit because that's like mini blankets, whatever the hell that means. I could swear for the next 5 minutes on just that. Okay, but the replacement strategy failed. 8-7. 8 councillors said, I don't really feel like doing a replacement strategy. Not right now, at least. Maybe some other time. Okay, that was the worst decision that they could have possibly made. It was essentially, okay, if we're going to be going down this way, then we still need to figure out how we're going to get missing middle on the ground. We're going to need to get our housing strategy. We have to keep rolling the wheels on the housing strategy. Here's all of these things we need to make sure. And this came from Councillor Schmidt, our favorite, our bestie, and Mayor Farkas together. They had a huge essay where they said, these are all the things that we absolutely have to do. We recognize that getting rid of blanket rezoning is going to be a really negative impact on the city, and so we have to bring that positive back in a different way that's going to be more respectful of voters. And 8 councillors said, no, I don't feel like it. And so that needs to be top of mind, I think, for folks, is that we need to start working on this, and we need to start working on this yesterday. If we are going to chart this path, then we need to figure out what we're going to do about it. And we can't just say, like, we can't have the double speak of, oh, well, we need a targeted approach, but not if it's an approach that's targeted, right? Oh, well, I'm not opposed to development. I just don't want it to be anywhere. So we need to make these contradictions clear out in the public eye, and we need to talk to councillors and make them understand the kind of fire that they're playing with here.
Yeah. Amen. Christian, final word.
Yeah, maybe I'll end it on. I kind of like the negative note. Yeah, it was. The call to action is so good, Biz. But those 8 votes, when that went through, I was like, oh, we don't have. There's no political capital here for positive change. This was. I think it was kind of like a bare minimum sort of thing, right? Like, and then that. If that doesn't go through, it's like, what will go through, right? These people have their eyes set on repeal, 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 repeal. And I don't know if they've even thought about anything else. Like, I truly don't know if they have, the 8 who voted against, have any intention of replacing this strategy with anything else. And so that's depressing. And I will end with that.
All right. Well, we'll see how it goes. I think the call to action is fantastic. I was feeling pretty doomery yesterday about all of this, and we'll just have to wait and see. But thank you, Biz. Thank you, Christian, for joining me on this first inaugural episode of Council Island. And thank you to the audience for listening. We're going to kind of pick it up a little bit, make sure that we are on a weekly schedule in 2026. This
weekly?
Was, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Some of the weeks are going to be like super boring.
Oh, super boring. But we have tons of stuff to talk about.
Does this podcast have cool theme music, Alex? Like Total Council Island?
It should. It should. I'd love it. If you look at our cover art that we've got right now, it's temporary cover art. So we've got some setting up to do, but we thought this would be a good first conversation that we could have, kind of keeping with the theme of Council Island. Let us know who you think should be voted off the island.
Whoa!
Yeah, we're gonna really lean into it. Get out your phones and text the number on screen now. But yeah, thank you guys for joining me, and we will see you all on the next one.